Welcome back. I wanted to talk to you a bit about JavaScript looping. You see, I actually left out a few other ways that we can loop in JavaScript. We've talked about our for loops, our while loops, our do while loops, and we also talked about for each. But there's actually two other ways that we can loop in JavaScript, and I want to show you how to do that in this video. Now, let's imagine we have a basket. And this basket is an array that, has our grocery list. Let's say we want to buy apples, we want to buy oranges, and we also want to buy grapes because grapes are nature's candy. They're delicious. Now, in order for us to loop through this basket, we know how to do this, right? We've learned about the for loops where we can just do let I equals 0, as long as I is less than the basket.length. We increment I one by one. And let's just console.log basket at index of I. So that's the first type of loop that we saw. If we run this in the browser and hit enter, we see that we get apples, oranges, and grapes. All right, so that's the first way. We already know how to do that. We could also use the for each loop that came new in ES5. And there we can just say item. We'll use arrow functions, which we've learned about. And in this arrow function, I'll just console.log item. And that looks a lot cleaner than it was before. If I run this function now, I get the same thing. We're looping over items. And I'm not going to show you how to do the while loop and the do while loop because we've talked about it. But there's two other ways that we can loop through things in JavaScript. The first one is called the for of loop. And the other one is for in loop. I know the naming is a little bit confusing, but stick with me here. The first one, the for of loop, works in a way that's very similar to these two. It's almost as if we're combining these two together. And this is a new specification with ES6, so this is a new feature of JavaScript. The way it works is we start with a for loop, and we say item of basket. You see that the syntax caught it nicely for me. It's all blue. And in here, we simply say console.log item. Not too bad, right? We're using the for keyword here, but we're saying of, and we're just creating a variable. We can name this whatever we want, of basket, which is our array, and that's going to loop through it. So that if I copy and paste this here and hit enter, I get the exact same thing. And as we know in programming, there's many ways of doing things. And these are just some of the ways that we can loop through this array. But I want to mention a key term here. What we're doing here is something called iterating over this array. And this wording, let's make this a little bit bigger. This wording is really confusing at first when you first hear it. But iterating simply means we're able to go one by one through an item, like let's say a basket, which is an array, go one by one and look at these items. And iterating is able to be done in JavaScript on what we call iterables. And these iterables is something that JavaScript provides us that says, hey, you can iterate over this thing. And what is this thing? Well, in JavaScript, you can iterate over arrays, and we've already seen that, and also strings. Instead of basket, if I just turn this into a string and I run the for of loop here, I see that I'm iterating over the string one by one. So both arrays and strings are iterable in JavaScript because we're able to iterate over individual items. And for of allows us to iterate over these iterables. I know, the wording is really confusing, but in a lot of tutorials, books, and even workplace, you're going to hear this word and you want to know what it means. But let's talk about the next thing, the for in loop. The for in loop looks something like this. And actually, let's bring this back to the way it was. So not strings, it's the array. And I'm going to comment out or delete the looping that we're already familiar with, just so we have better spacing here. Now the for in loop works with objects. So let's create an object here, and we'll call this object detailed basket. And this detailed basket will be an object that contains apples, and actually the quantity of apples that we want. We want 5 apples. And we'll have oranges as well. And we can just maybe say have 10 oranges, lots of vitamin C, and then finally grapes, and they're delicious, so 1,000 grapes for everybody. Now, with this detailed basket now, I can use a for in loop. And I can say for item in, instead of this time, detailed basket. And I can console.log here the item. So that if I clear this, let's copy detailed basket. So that's our object. And we run the for in loop here. Notice what happens. I get apples, oranges, grapes. The for in loop allows us to loop over and see the object properties, so that I can check what I need to go grocery shopping for: apples, oranges, and grapes. Now, here's the tricky part. And you'll hear this word mentioned a lot when you talk to your programming friends, and it can get really confusing. What we're doing here is not iterating, because iterating is something that we can do with arrays and strings. With an object in JavaScript, we're doing something called enumerating. I hope I spelled that right. Because properties of an object are what we call enumerable. And an object in JavaScript is enumerable if it allows us to see the properties. So apples, oranges, and grapes are enumerable. That is, we can use it in a for in loop to check them out. So enumerating is for objects. Now, enumerable and iterable. What happens if I switch these around? What if I have basket in here and the detailed basket in here? So we're using a for of loop with an object. What do you think will happen? Let's check it out. I'm going to copy and paste this into our console, hit run, and I get an error. Detailed basket is not iterable. And why is that? Well, we know that, right? I said that in JavaScript, we have arrays and strings that are iterable. And objects, in most of the cases, are not iterable. You see, for of loop doesn't work with objects because simply the JavaScript language needs to provide this property that is called iterable. And this property is only given by arrays and strings. And because for of loops only works with iterables, it's going to give us this error. But what about here? What if I do a for in loop on the basket, which is the array? If I copy and paste this and run this code, look at that. It's working. I get 0, 1, 2. And that is because underneath the hood, you can think of JavaScript arrays like objects, right? Because an array has an index of 0, 1, and 2. So we can think of basket as an object that has property 0 equal to apples. We have oranges that has index of 2 or index of 1. And then index of 2, we have grapes. So The for in loop is enumerating over the properties 0, 1, and 2, which lists it out for us. Let's make this a little smaller. But I wanted to make this video for you because a lot of people get confused between these two. And although you can go a long time without ever using for in loops, we can use something like object.keys that we've seen before, or values or entries, or we can use for each loops or for loops instead of for of. It's good to know these differences because if you see them in a code base, you want to understand what's happening. And also, if you ever hear somebody saying iterable or enumerable, you kind of have an idea of the difference now. To review, a for in loop loops over enumerable properties and enumerable property names of an object. The for of loop doesn't work with objects because they are not iterable. Now, there are small caveats and exceptions to these rules, but 99% of the time, you should consider this. You're using the for in loop for objects and for of loop for arrays and strings. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.